Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quality Marks podcast. My guest today is Ash Hynie. I first met Ash 10 years ago in a bar in New York when you were working at Huge
Hmm.
as probably one of the first developer advocate type roles before they started to become a thing. Since then, you have gone on to greatness through your various consulting gigs leading up to your time at Credit Karma, where you went from engineering manager to heading up their diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Now you have joined the ranks of founder, I like that title,
Hmm.
with Counterpoint, in
Hmm.
AI powered career management. I'm going to call it a platform. And I was checking it out, but you can correct me if you're wrong on that. So, you're a mom, wife, chef, engineer, DEI champion. Welcome to the QR podcast. And my God, aren't you tired?
I am very, I am very tired, and I can sleep when I'm dead. There's another dad joke for you. Um, it's a lot of stuff, but as the world turns, so do I.
Yeah, you've been all over the place, and you're good grief. I think you were in New York when I was there, and then you were in California. Now you're in North Carolina,
North
right?
Carolina. Yeah,
Yeah,
all over
and
the
kind of
place.
all over
So
the place.
yes. Also, that is hilarious that you remembered my developer relations role because that's right. When we met, that was my story to tell. And it was so fun and it was so daunting and stressful all at the same time. But I love where it's gone and I love the people who have carried it over. But man, I forgot about that. I'm gonna be
Yeah,
honest, I forgot.
I remember the first. I remember meeting you in the bar for the very first time, and I was like, "This person is way fucking cooler than me." I was like, I'm like, I mean, I just got introduced. I think I can't remember who were there, but like, Elizabeth Segurbo was there, Martin, a few other folks, and it was after some maybe AST,
Yep.
meetup, whatever thing, and we just started chatting and talking that night, and you were kind of like describing your role to me, and it was, I don't, is Huge still around? I don't even know if are they still a thing or
They are still a thing. I check in on my friends. So I have a number of friends. I mean, when you meet people along the way who are good people, you just hold on to them. So I still have a number of folks from Huge that I mess with, and some of them are still there.
really?
Some are still there. Yeah, which
That
is
seems like a
wild to me. I think
lifetime
it
ago,
has
doesn't it?
gotten
Hanging out in
old
New York like that? Good grief.
lifetime. There's
Yeah.
kids in the middle of that. There's multiple moves,
Yes.
like you said. Oh my heavens. Yeah, it's been years.
Yeah, same, same. So look, tell me a little before we get into the main stuff I want to really kind of dish with you. Tell me a little bit about Counterpoint. What are you trying to do there? Like what problem you trying to solve and like what's the secret sauce there?
There's two major problems we're trying to solve. So, Counterpoint is the original tool from those days at Huge. From those days, I recognize documentation is one of the most prominent ways to find your way through your career, and too many people don't know how to do it. And that's not a knock on people. I think that it's a gate kept secret of the more you document, the better your success.
Mm,
And so I just built what I needed back then, which was a way to document your successes by using conversational AI. So we trained an LLM to be an agentic people manager. So the same conversations you would have with your manager, it has with you. And then it retains that data to be able to provide insights for you on how you move through your career. So things like growth conversations, one-on-one information for your manager, etc. So that's what we're trying to solve for. We're trying to get people to be stronger advocates for their own career progression, and give them a really easy way to do it. Insights in your pocket.
yeah. I was talking because this has always been working in financial services. So I'm a meticulous documenter as I work on regulatory projects, anytime I might get audited. And I always tell people who work for me, or anybody who listen, document it in real time because you will
Real
not
time.
remember when it's time when you get pulled up on something that you have to actually just an annual review. You won't
Hmm.
remember all the things from a year back. You should be documenting as you go. And
As you
like
go.
I think I was chatting to Martin about it the other like weeks ago, and from a LinkedIn post that I did, and I was referring to like doing that regularly, particularly around when bad things happen. I mean, I'm always thinking about, okay, when am I going to get pulled up on something, or I have to produce evidence that I did something or something
Uh-huh.
else. But like using it for, you're talking about using it for just regular accomplishments, having a regular kind of check-in with it.
Everything. So what you said is important for people to note that even even the bad parts are part of the career, right? Like they're part of the documentation. When you get that ping from your manager and they're talking about, oh, well, how did this, bug issue happen or how did this ha whatever the case may be, one, people just aren't really good at recalling their notes also. So we created a really strong recall feature where you just say, I need to know all of the incidences or moments where this happened. So when you get into those meetings and people are like, no, this is what happened or this is what happened, you have what you need to be able to advocate for that. But the documenting as you go piece, everyone skips out on it until it's too late. And the performance review is the last thing
Mm.
that you need to be worrying about. What did I do 6 months ago? Because that thing that you did 6 months ago might be the most appealing part of your performance packet, but you forget about it. So we're just trying to get people organized and get them on track.
And is there like, I don't know if this is future phases or what are the rollout or larger plans look like, but is there like an opportunity to do like peer reviews or check-ins? Like is there like an enterprise level? You're smiling
Yep.
like I'm doing a pitch for you, but I
Like
honestly, I say when I
exactly.
started reading
Now
through
we're
it, I was
going.
like, this is a practices that I've advocated for and used regularly that seem to have like a technological solution other than, I actually do it in email to myself. I have like a whole folder of emails. I
Yep.
just write and send it.
Send it to yourself because you need those timestamps also. So we made sure
Mhm.
there's timestamps. But when you talk about enterprise tooling, how does this work for individuals? One, we want to make sure people's information stays with them. So your data is never going to be shared with your organization, even if they have the enterprise tool. However,
Oh, okay.
what will be shared with them is annotated data. So anything that gives a summary of how the temperature of the team is, what people are feeling, what they're seeing. So like heat maps of words that are constantly used within the text conversations of people on your team. So if you're a manager and you're using what's called ManageUp, which is our enterprise tool, so manageup.com, folks, ManageUp, that will be the heat map for the manager to better manage their people, right? Like
Okay.
when you think about management, the distance between managing individuals and also managing all the other stuff at the company they have to do is getting bigger and bigger with rifts and with manager leanings going on. So companies are having less managers manage more people. How are you as a manager functioning? We want to strengthen the manager relationship, not only with their employees, but also with the admin of the company. So, like HR, handing off the
Yeah.
things where oh, we've had some engagement drops over the last number of weeks. People are talking about the last comp announcement. We want to make sure that they have that strong conversational piece with their leadership. So, that's how we're rolling into the enterprise side of the business with
Okay.
ManageUp.
Because that is like
Yeah.
such a huge problem. And I always feel like, having worked in big enterprise tech firms, like banks and stuff like that, the performance management process is usually crap. It's
Yep.
almost entire yeah, it's usually entirely down to your pitching manager. So
Hmm.
whoever, if you got a good one, they know how to make the arguments. They've spent enough time to know you. You're so dependent on people who don't look at their role as an advocate for you, and it's almost parochial administrative crap. That and
Yep.
so I think that it's structurally crap, but then also
Hmm.
like you don't teach people or give them tools to like or practices to really know how to manage somebody like foster or advocate for somebody's career, and that's all about knowing those details and having them in some kind of format that you can like regularly check in with people because it's just horrible.
It is. And there are so few resources. People spend $3,000 to $10,000 a year on manager development that lasts 2 weeks. And then they forget about what they learned and they go about their regular routines and practice. And we just think, if there's anything, continual support for managers, continual support for employees, get everybody in the same room, seeing the same documentation, recognizing their opportunities and send them on their way. It does not have to be a heavy hand. It just
Mm.
has to be well directed and guided. And there's no better data than actual quality personal data, and that's what we're pulling from. So as we continue to work with teams and folks and stuff, it's only going to get stronger. And the performance management part of the business, we know it's too timely and it just lands somewhere in a folder and nobody's really doing much from it because calibration isn't even used from performance management data.
Yeah.
So, how do we get HR working less on something that's super burdensome, managers working less, and employees working less, saving time?
Yeah. I mean, and a couple of points you brought up there. I mean, my view, again, just being in kind of enterprise tech, I haven't really worked in a startup or a small tech firm or anything like that, or in the tech world. It's always been big enterprise tech. And that
Mhm.
whole calibration process, and it's like you basically get an annual review, and
Uh-huh.
Jack Welch and all his goddamn, calibration and I can't remember what the term is right now, or where you're top grading, right? I mean,
Yep.
good grief, did they unleash, hell on corporations for what a tool was usually supposed to be used to assess a business
Mhm.
is now used annually to basically destroy the morale and pit
Right.
everybody against each other.
Yep.
I mean, is that's what I still live in that world, right? That
Hmm.
has not changed literally at all in almost any of the places that I've worked. Is it different other places where you're like, give me some hope, Ash, that it's better
I mean,
somewhere else?
you want it to be different. There are so many phenomenal HR influencers on LinkedIn right now talking about how this story needs to be different. We're tired of the shit. We're
Mm,
tired of the overload just going into a system that basically breaks down the culture. Everyone knows stronger cultures build better businesses. Everyone knows that there's a line where HR and like performance management just gets too daunting for people and then they start to break apart. So everyone's trying to fortify that with self-care and days off and all this other shit, when in reality, just stop putting a magnifying glass on broken systems and making people go through the process of that. And so you do have companies that are more culture forward, who are more human centered, and they have conversations, or like at Credit Karma, we had peer perspectives instead of reviews.
right,
So it
right.
was just electing a number of people and we just have conversations about how we work together. And that information goes into the ecosystem of calibration instead of it being like, oh, documenting and then we do the top cuts or whatnot. Still, there's, nine boxing and all that other stuff that's necessary. But at least if you can take the burden off of folks of thinking they're under a magnifying glass with whatever they write, say, and do, and just have more conversations and create a way that that happens, you're gonna have a better culture around it.
Yeah. I completely agree. In my most cynical moments think that it's set up that way to disassociate people and that the warm squishy part we call a human from the number and
Yep.
the operational cost reduction we're trying to do by calling them resources and things like that, which is different than being a resource to someone as opposed to kind of
Yep.
a line item somewhere. And in my experience, like the HR in the 90s turned into keep X company out of court department,
Hmm.
not human resources. There's a whole other
Right.
layer of kind of performance management that got pushed onto people that probably weren't prepared to do that. And it's
Mhm.
never really gotten much better than that.
Covered. No. And
Yeah.
it won't. Well, I'm not going to be as droll to say it won't. I think the conversation is heading in the right direction, and there's a number of pressures happening in corporate. Like people are fed up. The return
Yeah.
to like COVID did a real thing. Like
Mm,
it did its big one in letting people know, like, oh, I actually have options to work at home and be just as productive, if not more. And now corporates, arguing with this return to office, which some companies that works really well. They are more productive in person than they are over Zoom and whatnot. Understandable. Every company culture is different, but it's the listening to our people instead of just pushing systems and process. And that is the issue is people aren't listening. And when they are listening, they're not giving back enough information to say, this is why we're anchoring on these decisions rather than these ones. And this is what creates a better business for us. And if you're on board with that, great. And if you're not, then maybe we can find a different option for you.
yeah, I agree. And I think like COVID seemed to me like a huge missed opportunity to fix some of that. And it's just like this giant collective trauma filled event that we're just all pretending like that didn't happen. Let's just now back to everyone back
So,
to normal. And people shifted their entire lives, around working
Mhm.
from home and everything else. And now it's like we're just expected to just like ignore that it ever
Ignore it.
happened. It's the strangest thing to like kind of like just push it down the memory hole and not have really learned anything from it. I mean, you maybe got a softer ear on remote working and working from
Mhm.
home and having that as an option. But like, I mean, the trend is back towards full return to office,
Oh yeah.
and we didn't seem to learn anything about managing people or remotely or any of that stuff that we could
Right.
have. So there's probably a big opportunity there.
But that's the thing, the companies that rolled into full remote. So I worked at an organization after Credit Karma that was fully remote from the stage of, oh, well, we went fully remote for COVID, so now we are fully remote. And we were building an employee engagement process around what does it look like to have a fully remote team? It was awesome work. We were recognizing some people don't like to travel, some like to travel. How do we get well distributed travel among all the people who are working productively with teams in person? Like all of this stuff were learned lessons. Now, this was a startup though. So when you think about the companies like yours that are a little bit older and well established, what you have are a lot of people who made a big career, a lot of money, and a big name out of the processes that got them where they're at. And so I think it's almost default to fall back into those habits and say this is how a
Yeah.
well-run company works. And there's no training for how do we one of the conversations we had was if we had better tools for remote work, then remote work would work better. And there was a reluctance to bring in better tools because
Right.
nobody wanted remote work, right?
Yeah.
So it's like this is not an unsolvable problem. This is just recognizing people just don't want remote work. And that's
But
fine. Again, that's a cultural thing.
that's like to me that's tied into control and
Of course.
trust, and just some people just can't get over that. They just think
No.
if they can't see you, I mean, the amount of time that gets wasted on a commute and in meetings and everything else is like I don't I think there's an app you can buy around that, but it's like it's like a meeting cost calculator. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? It's like if you just put in everybody's the average hourly cost of it and
Salary,
then just
yep.
hit start for every meeting and realize how much you
They're
waste
expensive.
on meetings and
Mhm.
transit and stuff like that. It's a phenomenal amount of money that really does grind on productivity. And if you can trust people enough to just let them get on with the work and know how to, but I don't think people know how to manage people remotely or know how to manage almost people full stop. That it's a partnership, not a management, and they're not
Mhm.
prepared to put in the work.
And these organizations are built on distrust. So
Yes.
you keep bringing up this trust aspect, and the reality is like people know how to manage things that they don't see because they trust them, right?
Mm,
Like we trust the fact that our engine's going to turn on in our car when we turn. We don't need to be looking at it in order to
mm,
say like, oh yeah, it's functioning. The car is running. We have the evidence to be able to say we're smart people, right? Like
yeah.
all these systems are doing is gaslighting us into believing that we're not smart people.
Yeah.
We can manage people remotely. We can. We can also trust people. It's easy to do. In fact, you can just give them the trust, but instead, people have to earn it. And then they're in these systems of what does earning it look like? And then it goes into this whole, well, earning it looks like this productivity and note taking. So documentation once again, and showing up to these meetings and being to meet. I've never heard more people complain about somebody logging onto a meeting 1 or 2 minutes. And I'm like, you have meeting after meeting. This person needed to go to the bathroom. Let them clear their bladder for heaven's
Yes.
sakes. But now it comes up in a performance review where, so and so, we have this meeting every day at 2 o'clock and they're always 2 minutes late. Yeah, because I have to take a piss. Like, are
Yeah.
you serious right now? It's like lunch was an hour ago. So where's the trust in these organizations to establish a remote work system
I
or
agree.
even like an
No, I was gonna say I haven't seen anything that you can't like any way to manage remote workers that you wouldn't have if you just knew how to manage people. It's to me, it's not anything different. It's just people don't know. It's a lot of work to partnership with somebody to manage their career and have that level of trust. You know what I mean? And people don't want to put the work in or don't have the skills. But I haven't seen anything different about managing a remote team than you would for a all in person team.
nope, nope.
Yeah.
And again, it's the tools, it comes down to your comfortability and then how your
Yeah.
organization supports you in being comfortable with that. Because there are managers that function really well remotely, and they'll even give their best bits to other managers in the org of like, hey, don't worry about it so much. And if
Yeah.
their performance is dipping, but so many people don't know how to manage performance either. And that's the
Hmm.
problem. No one knows how to get the hard feedback of, you're kind of slipping up here, and we need to see better performance from you. So then it gets to the hard conversation of HR of, well, if we just manage them by keeping them in-house so we can keep an eye on them, then they'll be producing better work. That's actually not the issue. They actually
Right,
just don't
right.
work.
And I
So,
would put it 70-30 managers versus the managed. You know,
mhm,
I see so much more bad management than bad performance.
mhm.
People don't know how to get good performance out of folks. You know what I
And
mean?
there's
Which is
so
about
much
advocacy
bias.
and
Yep.
trust and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, there's so much bias. No one really learned how to be a manager. We're in this pipeline of, oh, they're an amazing engineer. So now that they're senior staff or whatever, let's move them into a management role because we don't have an appropriate leveling where they can just go into an advanced IC role as a
Mm.
staff engineer. So we're going to make them a manager. That person doesn't want to be a manager. They don't like talking to people. So why
Hmm.
why would you make them a manager just because they're great operators? And that doesn't work the larger the organization gets. It might work better at startups, which is what I've observed. Really awesome operational people like who get work done, they do decent with management in smaller environments that are more personal. But the larger the system gets, they're just like,
Yeah.
there's all these rules on top of it. You're still asking me to produce this amount as an IC while also managing these people's performance without providing any tools. It doesn't work.
Yeah. I don't think I've actually worked anywhere yet that has really cracked the code on that IC versus manager of managers thing. Like that it's about building fiefdoms and how many people you manage and operational budgets stuff as opposed to the actual contribution that you make to the firm. And I still haven't seen it done really well yet where an individual contributor can feel like, oh, I've got a technical path here that's on par or treated with the same level of seriousness by the firm as somebody who's managing, 50, 60 people. That seems to be the only path through and is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of getting crap managers if that's your only way, to any kind of reward, you know.
Well, then let me just come in with Counterpoint and manage up, and we'll solve that problem for you.
Perfect segue, because we're going to come
Exactly.
back to career development in a second. But I want to shift gears slightly here. So, um, you and I gave a talk it was
Hmm.
2017. We gave that
Oh my
talk.
goodness.
I know, good. I know at Agile Testing Days called "Culture is More Than a Mindset."
Or than
Now,
a
in my
mindset.
very
Mhm.
limited YouTube, Z-list celebrity, it's almost 30,000 people have watched that video.
Oh, I
Um,
love it.
yeah, it's great. But we had a very, you know, our perspective was very pessimistic about corporate
Yeah.
DEI programs.
Mhm.
They're not very successful. They're looking in the wrong places. They didn't really address structural issues, all the things that you very eloquently illustrated, have been talking about for, a long time. So
Yep.
I call this, and I don't think I coined the term, but I refer to it as performative DEI.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, and so I don't know whoever that should be attributed to. I should make sure I get to. But for the sake
Mhm.
of this conversation, we're just going to say it. That's what it is. Do you think like there's a weird cultural shift going on right now due to politics and everything else? Are we witnessing the end of performative DEI, or are we entering a new phase of it, or with people canceling their programs and everything else? What's your view on that?
I mean, no, I'm gonna just bluntly say no. I don't think we're reaching the end of performative DEI. What I think is as long as there's a reward associated from a moral standing or a claim perspective, there will always be performative DEI. Like there just will. Um, Understanding whether companies are making the right decision around their DEI programming comes down to how efficient they are and how much budget they put into them.
Hmm.
Like I'm just gonna call it. Companies want they want the cream. They want to be able to say like, yeah, we've got a DEI program. How is your DEI team functioning on zero budget?
Right.
How do you not have a DEI team? Like this doesn't make sense. So the performativeness will be there where people are like, we're a woke team or we're, and I hate using that word, but like it gets thrown around, right? It's like, oh, we're aware and we're inclusive and we, we're edging on belonging and we're doing all this stuff. And it's like, okay, well, where?
Mm,
Right? Like this is where the this is where the shots fired noise comes in, where it's like, okay, well, show me. Show me what you mean by you're dedicated to the cause. Because as far as I'm concerned, just knowing the language and just throwing it around the organization does not mean that you are more than performative in your actions. And this is the reality that most people don't want to face. There is a level of dismantling of a number of systems that has to happen from a
mm,
corporate perspective in order for you to be a well-rounded DEI informed company. And
mhm.
too many people don't have the range.
Right. What do
said
you think I mean, has any good, because I mean, I don't I think I view it as a mixed bag in terms of success or failure of that. Because obviously there was a huge crest, wave, that went through, and we'll talk about the politics of it in a second. But I mean, did any good come out of that, or was it,
Absolutely.
I mean, I guess my view is that it's like they saying, faking being happy is just as good as the real thing. Do you know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
like if
Right.
did any good come out of that?
So their good is relative, right? And I
Yeah,
think the
that's
answer to
fair.
that is yes. I think the answer to that is yes. A lot of people realized they didn't have the range. A lot of people realized how deep-seated a number of these systems are in their organizations, which means like, oh shit, we actually have a lot more work to do that reverberates through so much more than just how people show up at the company or whether we're using pronouns or not, right?
Mm,
Like this starts to open up real conversations of, are we equitably paying people? What does pay
mm,
transparency actually mean? Do we have ramps for people who use wheelchairs? Do we have bathroom access for all people who present in all ways, right? Like these are things that people started to realize were actually easy fixes when they just stopped worrying about what people thought about them looking after their fellow humans.
right,
So I do think that there was a lot of good that came out of it. And I think it dug up a number of realities that assisted with a lot of guilt that people didn't realize they held around a number of the ways they existed in these spaces, given their demographics. Now, that was a really fancy way of saying,
yeah, I was gonna say you're gonna need to.
right? There's a lot of like white folks who are running around in corporate starting to ask themselves, why is this organization 87% white?
Hmm,
Right? Like these are real questions that started happening after DEI came through, but then the guilt set in of, well, I earned this spot fair and square. And then there
hmm,
becomes the conversation about merit. And then we have to deconstruct what does merit actually mean and where did that word come from and how is the structural competencies of the organization really inclusive in assisting people with being successful here?
right, right.
Why is the entire leadership team white? You know?
100%. And I think in that talk, I spoke a little bit about that, how like for me, it put a lot of language to things that like I had thought or felt but didn't know. It opened up a whole new bunch of authors and thinkers and things like to try and put some words to my situation in life and my contribution to that and how to actually help and fix things
Yeah.
and try and move things in the right direction, when to shut up, when to
Hmm.
speak.
When to stop talking, exactly.
You know what I mean? And so there was real, but I think you're right. There's a lot of people that just really didn't get it. And this whole idea of merit or meritocracy, and I mean, even within, the middle-aged mediocre white dude crowd, there's not really a meritocracy. You know what I mean? So it's to think that that was going to flow down. Um,
Right.
do you think there's a backlash? Like again,
Oh,
because again,
absolutely.
I don't want to focus on the U.S. administration right now and the stuff that they've been doing, but like because it's such a point in time and a very specific group of people trying to do something,
Yeah.
but it speaks to a kind of larger backlash. I think that like these people who are just silently kind of waiting it out and see what was going to happen and never really doing anything or changing hiring practice or that. Do you think that's real?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's pure evidence to understand that there was a backlash. And why the backlash happened is multifaceted as well. But something that is consistent throughout history, and I'm going to use an interesting example. I've picked up running again and I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm running. And I was listening to this podcast called Ghost Stories. It's actually out of the UK, and it won a number of awards in 2023, I think it was. But I love ghost stuff, so I'm like, yeah, locked in. And I'm listening to it, and it's about a family that's pretty prestigious in the UK. And when you think about the UK, you think colonial. Like for me, I'm like, oh yeah, the land of the colonialism, right? Like this is where a lot of that started. And again, being in touch with history and just knowing facts. This this podcaster goes through the story of how his wife's family holds regards for this person in their family who is a doctor and all this other stuff, but his wife was murdered by her brother and blah 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 blah. And there's a number of excerpts that are really revealing. And so I highly suggest people go and listen to this podcast because it's revealing on how
What's the name of the podcast again?
ghost stories.
Ghost Stories. I'll drop it in the
Yep, I'll
comments.
give you all the information.
Okay.
But it goes into how UK white men think about history, guilt, and their position in that. And that's not the point of the podcast, but of course, me being on the culture side of things, immediately clocked it. I was
Mm,
like, right, this is what we're experiencing en masse right now. There are a lot of people who are unwilling to come to terms with their personal responsibility and participation in this supremacist organization called life that we're in.
mm,
And they would rather silence the truth to hold on to the lie.
mm.
And so in the podcast, so many times these white men who were the older folks who put this man on a pedestal, whether he was the murderer or not, they would say, well, I would rather you stop doing this research because I would hate for you to tarnish the perspective and the view of our family, right? They would rather hold on to the lie of their stories told about this individual than know for sure whether he killed his wife or not. And that's everywhere now. And
Mm.
I think that is kind of the core of why there's backlash is now that we've got all this information and we're seeing how historically excluded people really exist in the world and how people can't make their rent and how people are being fired from their jobs because, they can't afford a bus ticket or whatever the situation is, accessibility, their communication styles, whatever. There's a silencing of that to re-enhance the comfort of the silence, right? It's like, I just don't want to hear it.
Right.
So many times you hear people, I'm not going to the unconscious bias training because I don't want to hear it. It's
Right.
not that it's not factual. It's not that they don't believe it. It's that they're more comfortable not being confronted with the reality that other people exist in a more difficult turnout because of oppressive natures of supremacy than they do.
Yeah. The thing I've always struggled with when I've had the conversations with people about this in quiet moments, or you're sitting around a room and it's just a boardroom filled with dudes that look just like me, right?
Hmm.
And I'm just like, guys, this just didn't happen. I think people can't get their head wrapped around the systemic part because either one, they don't want to believe. I mean, there's so much hard evidence about actual systems and laws and regulations in place to, reinforce all this stuff. But like, if as a engineer looking at this going like the result did happened as the result of a system. It's not just randomly occurring. And plus,
And
trust me, guys, we are not the best and brightest of that need to be in this room right now. I know a lot of you guys. There's no way there's not you just even at that level, but there's a refusal to accept that it could possibly be systemic because there's
Mhm.
just this inability to think critically about how they got to where they are in life because it somehow invalidates
Yep,
their how they got there or that
their
they have
prestige,
that they are
right?
smart or successful.
And that's the like I never used this term in this way, but I'm going to use it this time. A broken clock is right two times a day, right? And so even if the system was yes, all of these people who look just like you in this boardroom, you would at least have one or two women or
Mm.
Black or brown individuals in that room with you. Where it's like
Right.
the system, like when you're thinking statistically, is going to have to pick these numbers every now and again that display, oh, sometimes we receive an outlier. And but all of these systems are reinforcing, right? Like reinforced, where it's, oh, we went to the right schools and pedigree. Well, let's talk about what's happening with the Department of Education right now. Let's
Mm,
talk about what the acceptance rate, let's talk about affirmative action. Let's talk about, all these things keep getting proven to be problematic and only benefiting so and so and so and so. But then how are you sitting in the room, everybody, like cinching their ties saying, we all deserve to be here because we,
hmm.
through meritocracy got here.
I mean, I remember I was working with that school in the Bronx, and I went and did a career day with them, and I and two things kind of woke me up a little bit about what was really going on. Is that I was talking to the teachers ahead of time, and I was like, "All right, career day, got to go in there, do my spiel, talk about tech. Are there any messages you want me to reinforce with the students? Just trying to like be." And they were like, "Yeah, our main message to the students in this neighborhood is get out of here."
Hmm.
There are so many issues with living in this neighborhood of being successfully educationally that
Yep.
just we want you to get away from this. It's so
Hmm.
unhealthy, the asthma rates, the food, access to food, all that kind of stuff. There was like, get out of this neighborhood.
Yep.
And then the other thing was the book drive that we did wasn't for the school, it was to put books into their homes because
Hmm.
they're like, your kids probably have a library at home of books.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's a continual educational and reading system, that they participate in. These kids go home, they have nothing. They don't have,
Nothing.
who cares if they've got you give them a laptop, they have third world level stats for access to the internet. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? So it's
Yep.
like they don't have those two just like blew my mind when you're there and you talk to the teachers. It's like there's no way that's not a systemic problem.
Right. And of course, like folks will say, well, it just happened. And, because of the crime rates and because of this and that. I mean, read the book, The Color of Law, read what redlining is, read what all
Mm,
these, like who was able to get a mortgage? What happened when mortgages were more widely available? What happened when folks actually started getting access to housing in the cities? And where did the
mhm.
white and
That
prestigious
asshole who
individuals go?
built the
Right?
bridges
Like,
in New York too low that the buses couldn't get, it's like stuff like that.
exactly. On purpose.
Hmm.
Or they built the bridges too small so it couldn't
Yes,
carry the
yeah.
load, the weight of buses. So
Hmm.
it's like extent that folks will go to maintain this lie is wild. And
Yeah,
that's what has come out of this really big DEI initiative, which is nothing more than history. Like,
right.
let's rephrase and reterm DEI to just be history.
So if you think like I think we're still in probably violent agreement that a lot of these programs don't really work at the corporate level, which
Hmm.
is, I mean, sad and whatever, maybe, yeah, whatever. But what does the future look like for this stuff then? I mean, like what is a well-designed or where should it go from here? If this kind of performative stuff is you think is still going to go on for a while, if you really wanted to do something, what would you do?
I mean, that's a good question. There's no program that successfully runs in any organization that is not funded,
Hmm.
right? We, we're really serious about this, we will fund it. And we will give it metrics. And they'll be the right metrics. Here's the fun part that we both know from quality engineering is you can ask anything about how many bugs there are, but does that really tell you anything about the quality of the product? It
Mm,
doesn't. So we need to be asking the better questions is why are so many of the folks that got promoted outside of the demographics of historically excluded folks? Like they're all white or South Asian or Asian or whatnot. And there's no black and brown women historically. Why is that happening?
mm,
Run that year over year, quarter over quarter, whatever it is, and then start asking the harder questions of how are we going to prevent, where's the bias seeping in? Because these things aren't just happening, and then address them appropriately. And I think if we were, as professional and as study as we claim to be, then we would be able to have the hard conversations. But something that I've recognized over the course of my career, especially in DEI and employee engagement and in HR and all these other spaces, is that so many people are ill-equipped to just have the conversation.
mm.
and they take on too much of the weight of guilt. And this is something I was talking to another cohort who's in inclusion last week, and they were asking me about how I run my trainings for DEI. And I lean on the Brené Brown side of the house where I'm like, shame does nothing for us here.
Mm,
And I can't prevent you from being ashamed of who you are, or where you're coming from, or whatnot. What I can do is I can have a conversation with you to walk you out of that shameful place where we both hold some level of accountability and get us to a more actionable place.
right.
And I think too often folks are really big on pointing fingers and calling names, which is not a bad thing necessarily, especially when people are so resistant. But also, if we're really trying to work with this, then we need time and we need money and we
Right.
need space.
So the money thing is interesting because I the date I think was in 2020 when I
Hmm.
was actually on my local town council, in my short political career, and they were going to um, run a DEI task force.
I
And I
remember.
I
Hmm.
gave you a call because I read the charter for it, and I gave you a call, and all the things that you warned against, underfunded, didn't have a broad base, didn't have objectives, wasn't measurable. All those things were in there, and it was a reactionary kind of action from the local Democrats against us. And I ended up, you didn't tell me what to do, but I ended up voting against the charter, and it passed anyway. But looking up the other
Hmm.
night about it, it really hasn't had much success and has been
No.
very divisive, and hasn't delivered a whole lot. So one, you were as usual spot on that, and I took a no amount of stick from the local liberals for voting against it.
Right.
But I did make a very impassioned, here's what I think we should do. This is just
Mhm.
going to literally keep driving a wedge between people that we need, to help support this. Tying
Yeah.
that into kind of the crazy culture we're in right now politically with forcing governments and countries to try and cancel their DI programs to do business, with the US government. Do you
Hmm.
I think that's part of the backlash that the whole kind of permanent aggrieved white class in America was part of that backlash. But do you think that's not my question, and I promise I'm getting to it. Do you think there's a place for government beyond protecting certain classes in DEI, or is that, one step too far, or what's your view on what's going on right now?
Anything that's worth it is regulated, right? Like look at the health and well-being of the country. You're going to find food that's regulated, medication that's regulated, etc. When it comes to people existing in a way that is going to provide success for all of us, there's some level of regulation that's necessary, right? It
Mm,
is in ill form to think that there should be none,
mm,
especially with what we're witnessing with the complete breakdown of things that actually had real benefits,
mm.
right? Like people were getting insurance, people were getting food, people were getting clean water. Like think about Flint, right? You
Mm,
think about these things, and are people just going to willy-nilly just go and make the water clean again when they have a chokehold over bottling water and selling it back to the people? No, because we live in a capitalistic society.
mm,
So there's so often where just rights of people to live and exist and be healthy is getting overlooked for how much money can stakeholders make. And eventually we're going to run out of people, and then these corporations are not going to have any base
mm.
unless they're really thinking, AI is going to come through and wipe out all the jobs and no humans are going to be necessary. And I'm definitely on the side of the house where it's a tool. It's
Yeah.
not a replacement. So
Those guys haven't been right
good
about
luck with that.
anything. So I'm not worried about them being right about that.
Right.
That's just a giant scam to separate us more from our hard-earned money.
Mhm. Right. And put these organizations through the chaos that they are. So many
Mm,
companies are laying off too early, thinking that AI is going to come through and we can talk about that another day, or maybe I don't know. We can talk about it now if you want to, but too many companies are reliant on technology that is at the very beginning
Mm,
of evolution in what helpful can look like.
yeah.
And they're also recognizing they made an ill mistake and they're hiring those folks back. There are a lot of companies who were like, it's fine, I'll replace all my member services with AI. And then
Yep.
and they're like, oh, but who's actually running the retribution of all of these issues that are coming through customer service
Yep.
with AI? No one.
I agree. Have you read that the stochastic parents thing, Emily Bender and Tim Gebru's paper?
No.
It's really good. And it one of the things that they talk about, I was just listening to a podcast on them the other day. They were both interviewed in. It's from a couple years ago, but they're talking about as it, and I love this term. It's called unscoped technology, where
Mm-hmm.
it just it has no, good engineering has, as you know, has a scope, has a purpose, have something to test against,
Mm-hmm.
and these things have no scope. We don't know what
Correct.
they can be. Anything, they can be used for anything. And so I think there's you could drive a fleet of trucks through the holes in the flaws in some of this stuff. And I think, I would agree with you that they're tools to be used, that we're still learning, how to use them and what they are. But the oh, we're gonna, the Bill Gates, and pretty soon people aren't going to be needed for 80% or whatever his stat he was throughout. Most jobs will go away. I don't believe that either. I mean, the nature of work's always changing, but these are tools to
It's going to
be.
change. Exactly. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, but it's going to
No.
change. And it's like, sure, if we can anticipate that 80% of us are going to need to adapt in order to find room for AI within the course of our careers, the answer to that is absolutely.
Mm.
And what was it? Tobias, I forgot his last name, but from, oh, good Lord, I'm blanking right now, put out a message yesterday about how 100% of their staff is looking at how to implement AI in their roles. And that's
Oh, was that
100% what's going on here.
Shopify? Was that the I saw?
Shopify, that's what it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I saw that. I saw that
From
memo from
Shopify.
Shopify.
Right. And it's like, yes, you should be. And this is the message that I overall have for HR is having been an engineer going into HR, so much of my career has been how do we bring more of what creates structure in engineering over into HR?
Mm.
Very different scope of people working in HR than in engineering. Let's be honest with that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I don't think here needs to be, it doesn't need to be as lopsided. There are stats, there are metrics, there are tools that we can be using to make the human aspect of the job a lot easier for a number of folks. And there's a learning curve on the HR end of the house where it's getting more comfortable with what technology can do. And then also, how do you use it in a way that's beneficial for your role?
Hmm.
Everyone should be thinking about how AI is going to impact their ability to produce, but then also live. There are HR to like I've built agents to just help me my last car I bought, I built an agent to find it for me. And of course, back then it was just machine learn, all the baseline language of AI.
Mm.
But I built a scraper to find the car that I ended up buying,
Right, right.
and it was the car of my dreams. So it's how do we recognize that this is a tool that everyone should be thinking about, just like toilet paper. Everyone's going to use it, except maybe people with bidets, but uh, how are we going to use it?
I'm gonna work through that analogy later. I like that. The AI is toilet paper, so I like
Like toilet paper.
it. So I think the last point on the kind of government regulation piece, I think I agree with you that if it's important, it should have some, guardrails around it in regulation, and that it drives me a little nuts when, and we're having this issue internally. And actually, I will give a strong shout out to KPMG UK, the member firm that I work for, who is resoundly stood in support of our LGBTQ folks and our DEI programs, and said we're not making any changes in the
Yeah,
face of companies, some of my peer companies, that the US versions have canceled their programs and
yeah,
the European ones have kept it. So there's been a bit of a, you know, the point I'm belaboring to make is that, an executive order is not a law.
no,
It can carry the force of a law, but if you're canceling your DI program at this point, you're doing so voluntarily.
voluntarily.
And I think that tying back into the kind of performative aspects of this is that if the slightest pushback and you cancel your program, remove the language, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's really gutless is the most polite term I could
It's
put to it.
telling. It is absolutely telling. And I mean, Target right now fucked around and they're finding out. There's a number of
Mm-hmm.
companies who are like, you know what, cool, we'll do it and we'll get rid of all of our distributors who are black and brown and women, LGBTQ, etc. We're not going to celebrate Pride. We're not going to do. Who do you think is holding up the house here?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying it
Absolutely.
like, you know, the demographic of all of the historically excluded folks supersede those who are more conservative, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a friend, there's a cousin, there's a mom, there's a teacher, there's a right. You people are being impacted in ways around DEI. Women are 50% of the population, and like 80% of the recipients of DEI favoring.
Mm.
So when you sit there and you think even affirmative action, it's so interesting to see what the results of doing away with affirmative action have been. And the people who are recognizing, like, oh, the thing that was actually getting me a seat at the table is now gone. And I thought it was only for, you know, a lot of these policies at this point should be called like anti-LGBTQ or anti-Black or anti-Latino or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, because it's really an attack on very specific demographics that they don't want people to have access to.
Yeah,
So,
100%. And the left
yeah,
is terrible at that, and the right is they are just great at slogans that and
yeah,
changing the word to be you almost say the exact the goal is the exact opposite of what they're naming
absolutely.
it.
Co-opting the language and using it against the people that it's supposed to benefit. I mean, we saw this with woke, right? Like
Mm,
woke is a term that comes from basically ancient Black history in the United States. This is something we've used historically just to recognize that like there's a reason we have green books. There's a reason we have
mm,
um watch parties. There's a reason the Black Panthers existed, right? Like all of this was about staying woke and staying aware. And then all of a sudden now you have it as a term that is so derogatory in so many different directions, and it's impossible to use in a way that is authentic to its nature. And it's sad because we know what it means. And I say we collectively as a community, as you know, a member of the Black community. I
mm.
can't speak for all of us, but what I can say is there is a level of dismay that we have around the fact that the language we use to loosen the chains, if you will, it gets co-opted, and that's a strategy. That's on
Yeah.
purpose to muddy the water, to make history more difficult to tell, to make people confused. And then next thing you know, we move around to the next language. What was, critical, what was it? Critical race theory,
Yes.
you know, like all these things, just, what are you gonna do?
Yeah. And I would say like for me, again, part of my, ongoing education, all this has been, a bit of talking to my friends in the Black community about
Hmm.
just like, yeah, that was probably going to happen. It's just like just the
Yep.
complete and utter um expectation that white people are just going to let y'all down.
Yeah. I
It's just,
mean,
it's like, okay, so we just pick up and keep going and dust. It's like it's completely expected, and it's really, I'm
yeah,
still working through it.
we are creatures of resilience. And
Mm,
here's an interesting and fun story for me is the first day of Black History Month, February 1st, we were flying to New York City. We were going to Canada ultimately, but our flight was to New York first. And I'm in the airport and I get to our gate and I lock eyes with the most beautiful human I've seen in a minute and was incredibly and immediately starstruck. And it was the Angela Davis on
mm,
the first day of Black History Month in 2025, right? Like in the year of our Lord. And I was just so shocked at who I was seeing in that moment because when you think about the revolutionary that she is
mm,
and the collegiate that she is and the adversary, like all the things, not adversary, excuse me, but like she is the epitome of what progression looks like and what the fight looks like. And she was exactly who I needed to see that day because of all the stuff that was going on from January 20th into that moment. We end up sitting next to each other on the plane. And I wasn't trying to bother her, but I did ask at one point,
how do you not?
hey, right? How do you not? And I asked her, I was like, how are you feeling about all this stuff? And she looked me dead in my face and she said, "We've been here before." That was exactly what I needed to hear at that moment was we've been here before. The stories my mother has told, my mother who picked cotton at age of 8 for literally pennies to survive and to get, education and food in her house. These are our stories that continue to feed us during this time of extreme resilience that we need when the world continues to do what it does for us.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll look at it and we're like, we've been here before. And we'll look at it exhausted and we'll look at it disappointed. I know that's a word that my husband hates to hear, so I'll use that in this example. We look at it disappointed at all of the allies and associates out in the world who claim to be able to do the work to make the change. And we find ourselves back in this corner.
Yeah.
And we're like, you know what? Y'all figure it out this time. There's a heavy 92% rest going on for
Mm,
Black women and Black folks that we're gonna watch and see if the people who are really about this noise are gonna do the things that it takes because we've put our bodies out on the line, we've put our minds out on the line, all of the things, and yet we're still here.
mm.
So, anyways, that was my soapbox for the
Yeah.
day. You're welcome. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
So shifting back to career
Mhm.
management.
This is our cadence, Keith. Like,
Yes.
if you don't know that yet, then there's a reason you had me on here.
I knew exactly what we were going to
Hmm.
talk about. Hey, I picked the topics, but we were going to end up here anyway.
Hmm.
So actually shifting back to career
Yep.
development, I wanted to ask you about something I wrote about the other day and kind of got a little bit of stick and people were shocked about it, which is this idea of not being threatened by people looking for jobs, right? So like, and I've actually helped people figure out their resume, their CV, put like help them prep for interviews because I
Hmm.
think if you're really, one, if you're confident in your ability to retain people,
Hmm.
you shouldn't be threatened by them testing the market and knowing their worth and all that kind of good stuff. I want them to know what their street value is. And also, I think it's like it builds a level of trust with people that I've actually brought it up to folks. So like, maybe you should do some interviewing around and see if you're really that unhappy here, maybe you should go test the market.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of comments back from folks saying like, "Oh, well, you don't care about people, or you're doing your best to retain them." And I wanted to hear your perspective on that because obviously people wanting to leave is a good heuristic that you might want to think about how you're running your
Sure.
shop, but people leave for all sorts of reasons.
People leave for all sorts of reasons, one. And two, sometimes the organization positions itself so that people will leave. And we're seeing a
Mm,
lot of that these days. So there's two sides of this. And I'll speak to the recruiter side of this first. Of course, I've never worked in talent acquisition. I've worked tangentially with them, so I can't speak from their experience. But what I will say is that, yes, there's a lot of time, attention, and energy that goes into interviewing where I understand the side of the house that's like, we don't want to interview people who aren't serious because it takes a lot of our resources to do that,
mm,
right? And so, yeah, that's really hard on your company who's looking for great talent. And some of these people are locked into jobs that are really great. If you're not going into that experience with a learning mindset, though, then you're fucking it up
mm,
because any recruiter can learn what the market is about from people who are in jobs that feel really good for them to say no to the opportunity that you have. And most of them already know they just need that data to bring back to their hiring managers and say, we're not offering enough for this role, or we need to be
right.
more transparent as to why we're only offering this much for the role, or these other companies are doing X, Y, and Z in order to get their people to stay. They're providing benefits here, they're providing days off here, they're letting them work remotely, right? Like this is a data gathering exercise for a lot of talent acquisition folks, and they would learn something if they were excited about interviewing folks, even if they are well established in a career somewhere else.
Hmm.
On the other hand, my coaching philosophy is always be interviewing. If
Mm,
you don't know what's out there, you don't
yep.
know what you're missing. And too often people get very comfortable and soft and excited about these jobs that they should, quote, be loyal to.
Mm.
Corporate is an interesting place where it wants you to be family, but it'll never call you
I was just
family.
gonna say
It
that
wants
those are
you to
the
be
people who get
loyal.
sucked into this is a
You're my
family
family. The
noise.
moment you're family at an organization, deuces. Like you need to get out of there because
Mm,
what think about how you fit into your family. I love my family. My sister literally lives across the street and I love her and I'm so glad she lives across the street sometimes because that means I can go in my house and she can go in hers. But also, easily access. Not everybody has a great association with their family. So why would
yeah.
you work at a place that analogizes the relationship you have with the organization as family?
Mm,
So you personally can learn from interviewing as well. What am I leaving on the table? What opportunities are out there? I personally interview so that I know how other people are talking about my role.
mm,
So that if there's something that we're not doing as an organization, I bring it back, especially if I'm excited and I'm very happily employed there. When I was in
yeah.
DEI and I was hearing what other companies were doing, even as an interviewee, I would bring that back and I'm like, we need to be doing this
Yeah.
because they're thinking about it and that is wildly successful. Here's how we do it, right? And I would not have ever gotten that experience without interviewing. So I just think if people are really concerned about their folks interviewing, maybe they need to up their game on what they are using to retain them.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, the people that I've, helped like this or suggested it to them, and then we go get their resume together and prep for interviews or whatever, or hear us, it gives me some information as well. But I think it makes them better advocates for themselves. So
Hmm.
like an interview process is all about selling yourself and pitching yourself and, asking good questions of where you go. And I think because this is another opinion that I have is that we use these words like advocacy and sponsorship and allies also, and like people don't know what any of those fucking words mean,
Hmm.
or they don't know how to act that way. And I strongly believe that you need to have people in rooms you're not in who will fight for you.
Hmm.
But you're always going to be your best advocate, and you have to learn the system you're in and how to work it to get any benefit from those things.
Yeah.
And I think letting people go interview helps them do that internally,
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is I just I don't keep scrolling. If you didn't like the post, keep scrolling.
Yeah.
And I say that with like so much love in my heart for folks, but sometimes it's not your fight. Like
Mm,
if you feel that strongly about people interviewing, maybe talk about it in a way where there's a strong argument as to why they should not be. That's something I have not heard. What
yeah,
is the strongest argument you have to me as to why I shouldn't be interviewing while I'm gainfully employed?
right.
What are you afraid of? Or what's the lesson learned here? And if you can present an argument to me that makes sense, then I can mull it over and say like, yeah, actually, that what's likely going to come out though is you don't have enough loyalty or vision with the company you're at. It gives a signal that you're unhappy. It does all this stuff. Sure. And it could just say that I'm curious. All of that feels like projection to me.
Yeah,
It feels like you have preconceived notions as to why I would be interviewing. Meanwhile, I'm just out here, in the streets having a good time.
yeah. I think people have really, and some of it's from COVID and the last couple years of post-COVID, but there's a lot of like I think that whole family nonsense feels old to me. Where
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, where it's a red flag for abuse. But like this whole idea of we're our companies are family. I think a lot of that has been laid bare through and the lie put to it through COVID and post COVID that like a lot of these companies do not give a shit about you
No.
and had never did and will tell you things just to keep you retained. And so I think focusing on your own individual relationships with people as opposed to kind of advocating for a company, because as you know, in quality engineering, I'm sure DEI is even smaller. It's a small world, right? So
Hmm.
it's like you run across a lot of the same people, and having some personal integrity and how you've treated people and your brand around that when I'm hiring wherever I might go or for any project is carries much more currency than whatever company I'm at, because I think this
Exactly.
idea that the companies actually care about their people, while some might, you don't see a lot of people of companies living their values these days or what they write on their slogans.
Right. And I wrote a blog about this where I don't even know if I published it. Maybe not. I don't know. But I was talking about how companies want to assume the position of an identity, like they want to assume the position of a person. They're not people. Companies are not people. There might
Mm,
be people in the organization who are making decisions that are more human-centered or that care about you as an individual, but en masse, in order for them to be considered people, then they need to be held responsible for the way that they act towards people. So all
mm,
these mass layoffs that are going on and whatnot, then need to be held to account. They need to there need to be words behind that that say, we let go of half of our family.
right,
We
right.
let go of half of our family. And we did that because we were irresponsible in our spend, whatever the situation or
Hmm.
circumstance was. But a lot of them won't do that. What they'll
Right.
do is they'll revert back into the business side of the house and say, oh, no, this is just business. Okay, then if it's just business, then stop trying to present the company to me as if it's an actual living, breathing entity that makes its own decisions. It doesn't.
Yeah, I agree. I always have taken the George Carlin view on this is I love people, I hate groups of people. Don't
Mhm.
trust them. You know what I mean? So it's like in a company is just a group of people,
A group
making
of
decisions
people.
that no one has singular accountability for. Yeah.
Right, right. And that's over under on this one is we've seen a lot of vitriolic behavior from organizations in the last 3 years that help us to understand that this is a new age of employment and people will be interviewing. So
Mm.
instead of getting caught up on the fact that you do or do not like that, what are you going to do instead?
Yeah. And that's another like just the retention policies aside, the I remember and I'm old, but like you used to have relations. You don't have to nod so quickly that I'm old, Ash. Thank you. But
I was nodding because you're old.
you're in
You
wide
are old.
agreement that my ass is old. So anyway, um like working with a recruiter, like you actually had a relationship with them and they're
Mhm.
like and when the onset of Monster and job boards and all that stuff, and just like bunging CVs at anything that was open, it's so hard to find people. It really truly is, and
It
you have,
is.
and that hasn't gotten any better.
No,
I
but also we are in the dating app era of recruiting,
mm,
where there's always a good, better, best. There's always a best out there, and people will there's infinite stories of people being ghosted, not being treated with empathy, not being told, "Hey, I'm going to be 10 minutes late to this interview because I'm running behind on my last meeting." Um, People being handled really poorly, and there's real trauma coming out of the workforce because of this.
mm,
Folks can't sit here and act like I think it's really interesting the conversation that's going on where the folks from your era, the old guys, if you will, who did build relationships with recruiters and have a very different experience, having a lack of empathy because all their experience has taught them that there's a certain way of doing business, but it has not been enlightened to the new way that business is happening. So
hmm
where we get the, well, you got to hunker down and you've got to keep interviewing. People are sending out
mm,
900 resumes and CVs and interviewing with 500 of those companies and getting callbacks for seven,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like there's got to be a real conversation of we are in a new era on all fronts of corporate,
yeah.
and there are too many people who are holding up the house that are not empathetic enough because their experience is not allowing them to be.
Well, and I think it ties into what we were talking about earlier about the whole systemic aspect of this. So like
Mhm.
my network is not LinkedIn. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? It's like I have 10,000 followers, whatever, on LinkedIn, but that's not my network. When
Mhm.
I want to find somebody or do something or whatever, there's a different, exactly. It's
Yep.
a
You're
completely
texting them or you're
different,
calling
which
them.
no one has access to but me. So that's
Mhm.
like, there's a bit of, with the, you can really make me sound old here, but like with social media and stuff like that, it feels like you're connected to people. And I still
Mhm.
see success stories on LinkedIn that I put it out there and people 1,000 people shared my post and finally after 6 months I got somebody I got an interview or whatever.
Yeah,
There's an appearance of that, but I think it's much more sparsely spread across
it
people who
is.
have been successful that route. And like I said, you don't have access to my personal network.
Mhm. And don't be disillusioned by the likes, right? I think that That here I am the millennial right in the middle, right? Because there's Gen Zers who really do latch on to the social media aspect. I've seen it all. I've seen the origins of Facebook all the way to TikTok, and I'm on both, right?
Mm,
Or all of them. And there's this like, well, I got this many views and I got this many likes. And to me, none of that really holds up weight. Maybe in some cases it should, depending on who I'm dealing with.
right, right,
But as far as folks that are also millennials like myself, likes really don't indicate people who are locked in and engaged. What they
right.
do indicate is that people saw it and they had a reaction, a response. And am I going to put weight into that? Um, LinkedIn is such a fascinating place. I was capable of taking a lot of those relationships from LinkedIn out of the group chat, if you will. Like I saw folks in person, I met
Mm,
them. And that's the beginning of the network. That's when
right,
the network begins for me. And not to put so much emphasis as in person or even Zoom calls, but there is a different relationship and association you have with people when you start letting them understand your story and how they can be of help. Every time I end a call with somebody is, well, how can I help?
right.
Or not in the call, excuse me, begin a call. It's like, hey, what's up? How can I help?
Yeah,
Because that is network building. And I think that those are the arts that are lost with the further away from the in-person, the telephone call, the text message network that we get, that we have, and we get more into that social media of what can I gain
yeah.
instead of how can I help?
So what's your, to kind of bring this full circle, right? What's your like top three, like people ask like how do I navigate this, like what should I be doing, there was a while people were like, oh, I need to have like with GitHub I need to have a public resume, you know what I mean, where people could go look at my work. What's your top, I hate to say top tips, but like what are like what's your best advice to people how to navigate this mess of stuff?
Heavens. One, like my number one is never be tied to one single role or opportunity with all of the myriad of skills that you have.
Mm,
There is so much transferable work that you can do with the skills that you have. And we're seeing this more and more with gig, fractional, and interim work that's out there. And we're going to see more of it because of the enhancement of AI. And so recognizing that you might not be a senior SWE for the rest of your life,
mm,
you might be a TPM who does SWE work in the product, marketing team for the next, 2 years because of, how good of a relationship that you built with products at your last gig. There's no more like lineal work that's happening where because you were one role, you're the next. And I mean, my career, I think I've proved that time and time again where I've been so many different roles. I've just followed my passion and the skills that I had and how they would be useful.
mm,
So that's my number one. The number two is be transparent about your skills. So this goes back into why I built Counterpoint. Talk about yourself. And we're really good at talking about ourselves, but unfortunately, we don't document it in a way that gets that information over the line. So finding tools that make that easier for you and then being able to share that in a way where folks understand who you are and what you're about.
mm,
So that hiring you is easier, your personality starting to show. This is the swing of social media. It is showing more of who people are. Influencership is becoming a really big deal in these spaces, and being able to yap about certain topics, people start to trust that,
mm,
become that person. And then the third is, be resilient and accountable. Be resilient and accountable in whatever way that's defined in what process or what stage of the process that you're in. If you are following up, be kind, be empathetic, right? Like these are playground politics.
mm,
Recognize like someone else is on the slide. I need to wait a second before I go down.
right,
But just be human about the process. Be be present.
right. All
I
right,
know that's
so
hand wavy. You know me.
so what finally here, what resources do you want to point people to, your websites, how to get a hold of you, things they need to know, and what are you doing for the rest of the year? Where are you going to be?
Yeah. Download Counterpoint. It's free. It's on Android, it's on Apple. And download it, use it, join our Discord, tell me how you feel about it. But more importantly, document your success. Use those insights to generate your next moves. The more you talk to it, the better the data is, just like any other AI tool. But we're specifically trying to create an experience for you. So that would be what I would say. You can go to counterpoint.io. You can look us up on whatever downloadable you have. We're there.
We'll drop
And
the
if you have
link in the
questions,
chat.
yep. If you need anything, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on TikTok, Ash Tech Bestie on TikTok. Come find me. I'm always yapping. But where am I going to be for the rest of the year? I've got a few conferences coming down, which is, I'm jumping back in the conference game. Paul Graham do stuff that doesn't scale. And so I'll be at ATD this year, Agile Testing Days. I'll be at Ministry of Testing in Brighton, over in the UK where you're at. That's kind of the only two that I'm going to talk about right now because they're published and live. But yeah, would love to connect.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Ash, it was absolutely lovely catching up with you and talking. I'll see you at both those places.
Yeah.
I'll be hanging around there. So, but thank you very, very much. It was, as usual, very educational and enlightening and funny. So that's why I like talking
Always a
to
good time.
you. So thank you very much. And that's it.
Perfect. Thank you.